Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Merrimack School Board this Monday evening, March 16th, 2015. Would you all rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we begin, a quick announcement. Board member Davis Powell is excused from tonight's meeting due to business travel. And that takes us to item number 2, approval of the February 16th, 2015 minutes. Is there a motion? Made by Vice Chair Barnes, seconded by Ms. Guglielmi. Any amendments? Ms. Guglielmi.
On page 4, line number 177, I would just rephrase that to say educators and students were welcome to share their first coding project by board member Guglielmi.
Okay. Any other amendments? Seeing none, we will put the minutes to a vote. All those in favor of approving the February 16th, 2015 minutes as amended, say aye. Opposed, and one abstention. So the motion carries 301 with myself abstaining. That takes us to item number 3 on tonight's agenda, public participation. This is an opportunity for the public to address the board. All we ask is that you come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Is there anyone looking to address the board under public participation? Seeing, oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you.
So Natasha Bayramova, 26 Crosswoods Path. This is my first time, so forgive me. I apologize in advance if I don't know the details. I know you guys obviously hear certain things all the time, so I apologize if you're like, oh, yeah.
We're happy to have you.
So I have a question and a comment. The question, and I don't know if you want to let me then answer the question later. So the question is about the parents' feedback. Just this year and other years, like how much feedback you guys actually received, and does it differ year to year? Like is this year a big one? And also, what would you consider a substantial feedback? Let's say it's 10 emails is kind of like, or 10 is actually if every email of the 10 says the same thing, would that count as substantial? So that's the question. The comment, I do want to comment on the calendar. I did email, but I want to repeat some of the stuff here. So I have a daughter who's in 4th grade, and I have a son who's going to start kindergarten. So I've been in the school system for 5 years, and unfortunately didn't participate. This is a little late in the game, but better late than never. So it seems to me that every year is pretty much the same. The calendar gets posted, gets approved with almost no changes, and life goes on. This year, I actually had time, and then it's really late this year because of the late Labor Day. So that's kind of why it prompted me to comment even more. So what I would love to see is a shorter year. And of course, well, how can you do that? So I had some suggestions only because I hear other schools do that. So to me, it's like, well, it's possible, I guess, of other schools. So let's say, I guess I've heard that Amherst added like 20 minutes to a day. I think it's like 5 minutes before school and then 15 after to account for the extra snow days. So they count. So they only have like extra if it's if they really go over. And even right now, I think that last day is like the 10th of June, which is compared to ours. Also, some of the some people that I talk to don't oppose to maybe either getting rid of the April vacation or combining, let's say, February and April into one in March, or getting rid of February, so something like that. I do know this year it is really late, but I guess it has to do with the teacher's contract, so they can't be. But I also heard some other schools ask teachers to. There's like the teachers can actually vote that it's they agree to come back earlier, even though I don't and like I said, I'm not sure how it works, but That's what I've heard that happened. Also, maybe some of the holidays, like there's some, but I see the holidays, I think it's only a couple of days. To me, the vacation or the extra day would really have, more effect on the calendar. I think that's all I put in my feedback. Right, so I would really love to, that's my biggest point. Because we do, like I said, it seems like it's the same every year. I thought, why maybe not try something different, even if it might be a little controversial, to some people, but maybe try and see what happens. Because, a lot of people say, I would hate to not have February vacation, but then when it actually happens, maybe they realize it's pretty good, and then if it really is so bad, then was always next year, then we go back to the old calendar. Why can't we just kind of maybe see? And like I said, those are the only suggestions that I thought of because I've heard things, but you guys might have talked about something totally different, totally out of the box. So I would love to hear that too, just to, see what kind of ideas you had. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Item number 6 on the agenda, which I imagine will be to relatively quickly. You've queued us all up to make sure that we address each of those questions and concerns and the suggestions. I thank you for your letter, your attendance, and for speaking at the meeting. So why don't we move through and we'll get to that topic. That takes us now to item number 4 on tonight's agenda. Acceptance of gifts and grants under $5,000. Business Administrator Chevenel.
Thank you very much. This evening we have a gift to Merrimack Middle School from the Target Take Charge for Education program in the amount of $100.71. As we've stated before, you can designate a certain percentage of your purchases at Target to a school of your choice, and this happens to be Merrimack Middle School, and again it's for $100.71, and it is for classroom supplies, and there are no restrictions on how the money is used. Thank you.
Wonderful. Is there a motion? Mr. Schneider.
I move that we accept this gift from Target with our sincere thanks.
And seconded by Vice Chair Barnes. All those in favor of accepting the gift of $100.71 from Target Take Charge signify by saying aye. Opposed? None. The motion carries 4-0-0. And that takes us to item number 5 on tonight's agenda, the consent agenda.
Thank you. I have the following items tonight under consent. The following teacher resignations, retirements, Marcia Parzik, speech language pathologist at Mastrocola Elementary School. Susan Ruggieri, special educator at Merrimack High School. And John Vandekar from the Technology Education Department at Merrimack High School.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Vice Chair Barnes.
I move we accept the consent agenda as presented.
And a second made by Mr. Schneider. All those in favor of accepting the consent agenda as presented signify by saying aye. And that motion carries 4-0-0, which takes us to item number 6 on tonight's agenda. Second review of proposed school calendar for 2015-2016. As was just mentioned under public participation, at our last meeting, we received a draft calendar from the superintendent. As has been the practice in the last few years, the start of students returning to school was scheduled for the day after Labor Day, with teacher workshops consolidated into the week preceding that. And the calendar lays out very similar to this year's calendar in terms of holidays, vacations, etc. And the calendar ended school on June 17th, which is one day later than this year's planned end date. But because of the late Labor Day this year, the calendar seems to start extremely late, right? Labor Day is effectively the latest it can possibly be, the first Monday in September is, in fact, September 7th. As has also been our practice the last few years, the board requested feedback from parents on the calendar. And I have the results of that feedback here. This year, we heard from 78 families. To put this in perspective, we probably have about 1,500 families in the district. It's not a large number. However, that feedback is important to us. And to perhaps give some perspective, the number's been rising. The first year we did it, I think we had about 40 families respond. Last year we had about 60, so each year we're going up an increment of about 20 families. Let me share with you what the responses of that set were. 20 families supported the calendar as is. In other words, they made no comment and in fact liked the calendar as it was. There were 41 families, however, that would prefer to see the school year start before Labor Day, with 6 families explicitly saying, I like that the school calendar is starting after Labor Day. Now, one of the working assumptions in the calendar is that we do the teacher workshops in a block the week before school starts. If we were to keep that schedule and move the calendar back, we have some contractual limitations with the Teachers Association and support staff in terms of the first day that they can report to school. Currently, the agreements say that they can come no sooner than 1 week before Labor Day. So I think one of the options before the board is to potentially bring the calendar back, but we're still going to have to hold days off for the teacher workshops to offset those days that we pull the calendar back. So our ability to actually get out sooner is limited by that. It's pretty clear from the response rate that a lot of people didn't understand that constraint that we have. 28 of the folks who preferred to see it start before Labor Day alluded to the fact that that would allow us to get out sooner, and I'm not sure that's in fact the case. Additionally, 11 of those folks cited some concerns with summer camps ending earlier in the summer, leaving a gap between when summer camps end and when school starts. Some other concepts that were raised were, and as was mentioned in public comment, was consolidating the February and April break into one break. There were 25 folks who mentioned that concept, and there were 2 people who explicitly said, I like having 2 breaks. The concept of teachable hours or extending a school day in order to shorten the year was raised by 19 people, other districts doing that. And then there were a number of other concepts that were raised with relatively smaller numbers, but they're important and I'll share them. There were 6 people who suggested that we conduct school on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. There were 5 people who suggested that we should observe President's Day. There were 4 people who suggested that we not observe Columbus Day. There was 1 person who suggested that we not observe Martin Luther King Day. 1 person who suggested that we not observe Christmas Eve. There were 3 people who wanted a longer break at Christmas, so to extend that to a full 2 weeks. And there were 2 people who explicitly said that they didn't like that idea, that they liked the Christmas break exactly as it is. And then there were 7 people who suggested that the district employ something that's called snowpacks or blizzard bags. For folks who don't know what that is, it's a process under which the school has work prepared online in the event that school gets canceled. The students do that work, turn it in. 80% of the students have to complete it in order to get credit for that day. And 7 people had suggested this concept. In terms of trends, and I want to make sure I answer the fine lady's question, I think in the past, the trends, this year's statistics are relatively similar to what we've seen in past years with one exception. And that exception is the Labor Day start. In the past, we've had people say, in a greater majority, I actually like that you're starting after Labor Day, getting the workshops out of the way so that we can conduct the year. And I think this is one man's opinion, and I'm sure when we open it up for discussion, we'll hear others. I get the sense that it's just because Labor Day this year is so darn late, frankly. But otherwise, I looked at it, and the numbers are not dissimilar to what we've seen in other years. So that concludes kind of the aggregation of the feedback that we received from folks. I know at the board's table last week, there were some requests of the superintendent to look into other districts' calendars in the South Central region and what their practices were to, again, help inform our discussion. So I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you. So there are actually 16 other districts or schools in the South Central region, and I have 15 of the 16 calendars. The only one that hasn't been determined as yet is Manchester. It won't be determined until April, so they were a little hesitant about passing out when they might start. And all of the schools their beginning day goes from August 26th to September 2nd. So clearly, because Labor Day is late this year, they've all chosen to go earlier. And I would assume, therefore, also they do not have a teacher agreement either that precludes them from doing that. So it could be 2 weeks out, if you will, before Labor Day. So that contract is very important because it really puts a parameter on what you are able to do. All of the districts use school days as the marker. So none of the districts in the South Central region use instructional hours. And maybe it's important to point out who these districts are. Nashua, Hudson, Salem, Bedford, Goffstown, Hooksett, Candia, Auburn, Timberlane, Wyndham, Pelham, Chester, Litchfield, Londonderry, Derry, Manchester. So it really is kind of, if you will, kind of a hub. Now, in saying that, when I say school days, when you go through the school approval process, they look and see how you measure time. So we would give over calendars that measure by day. But you also track instructional hours. When I'm doing a delayed opening, I'm watching the hours as well. So I would just say that we all still operate by days. The systems that is closest to us, but it's considered in the Southwest region, is Amherst. They have gone to instructional hours, and I'm going to say that I'm sure that was a part of a negotiated agreement because it changes the working conditions. So if you start getting into elongating a day or whatever, that's something you talk about with the faculty. One of the other questions that was asked was about blizzard bags, and what you need to know is that to go that route, you submit your plans to the commissioner. They're approved by the Department of Ed. So just because you were engaged in blizzard bags 1 year does not mean that it necessarily rolls over. You have to renew, and some have gotten in and pulled out. Currently, as far as the Department of Ed is concerned, there are 7 districts and 2 charter schools. And for your knowledge, they are Cornish Elementary, Pinkerton Academy, Derry, Barnstead Elementary, Kearsarge, Tamworth, Madison, Freedom, Moulton Borough, and the charter schools are Next Charter School and the Founders Academy. So 9. I think there are 160-some districts if you add it all up. I don't have exactly the total. I could find that out. So that gives you a sense. And so the one really in our district that's using it now, or on our region, is Derry and Pinkerton, because the Derry kids go to Pinkerton for high school.
Thank you. And I would just note, as it relates to flexibility in the calendar and the contracts, we, both in terms of how soon we can start and as well in the length of the day, that the 3-year agreement with the MTA is up at the end of next year and will be bargained again in the coming year. So I think, based on the feedback that we've heard, flexibility in the calendar is going to be very important to us. But in terms of setting this year's calendar, I think we've got the agreement that we've got. For the board's purposes, and I'll open this up for discussion, but it would be my intent, based upon the nature of the feedback that we received, to request of the superintendent to go back and draft another proposed calendar that looks at breaking up the teacher workshops from the beginning of the school year and spreading those out over days into the school year, so that we can, at the very least, start school sooner, recognizing that the workshops will still need to take place and that we may not have a direct impact on the end date, but enough people, without making the assumption that it would get us out sooner, still wanted to start sooner. Does that make sense? Ms. Guagliumi.
Yeah, I just had a question. I think it kind of fits with the
Sure.
background and some of the other statements that you've made. And I'm wondering if either you or Marge could explain a little bit about where there might be some other constraints in the calendar, such as if there's any busing agreements, as well as the vocational programs.
Yeah, I can't speak to the busing, but I'll start with other restrictions and the vocational ed, which I'm sure the superintendent can clarify. And I'm glad you asked it, because there are actually 2 holidays that we're required to observe per statute. And I think that while it may not have been mentioned here because it probably wasn't an option, but there's 2 holidays. One is Veterans Day, and the other is Memorial Day. So we're obligated by state law to observe those 2 holidays. So those must remain fixed. The other issue is the vocational ed program, and we've had this concept of splitting up the holidays, the February and April vacations, consolidating those into a single March holiday, and have actually looked at it. The superintendent has gone to other districts to see what their inclination was. Has there been any discussion? Would there be any interest if we were to try to lead the way in this regard? And one of the reasons we need to do it in concert with other districts is the vocational education program, where we share services with other districts. I think Alvern, Nashua. Yeah. They send students to our district. We send students to theirs. It's not the majority of students. It's a small segment of our population at the high school. But if we were to consolidate our vacation, we would potentially have those kids missing 3 full weeks of instruction, right? One for the week that, actually 2 weeks for February and April that Nashua and Alvern were out, and in addition, the week of our vacation, right, where students from those districts wouldn't be able to receive instruction. So that's something where we've been trying to coordinate with other districts so that we don't adversely impact a segment of our population. As far as busing contracts, I don't know, Mr. Chevenel, if you have any clarity on those constraints.
Well, we're contracted for 180 days,
Regardless.
regardless.
Okay. Yeah. Vice Chair Barnes.
I know you're talking about, where we might want to consider going back to the MTA. And areas that we would want to look at, I think, as well, are the presidential primary and the April election. So if we're saying, if we do want to start a couple days early, could we look at those 2 days as workshop days? Because the presidential primary is going to be and that's going to be difficult for Mark. I'm not saying I'm not putting a very, heavy burden on you to do this, but we don't know what kind of traffic it's going to create. And even if it is at JMU's, I think we have the concern of being the first in the state and the amount of press that will go to districts, and being the largest voting district in the country might give us some special attention and consideration.
Yeah.
So those things come to mind for us, that as far as student safety and security and
Schedule.
yeah. So that being said, those would be areas, especially with a moving target, and that would stink for you, Mark. I'm not going to lie, because you bring in a lot of great consultants, and you wouldn't give them the same lead time you give them for an August Academy. But April election, same thing. I think, we have an exercise this year based on what we learned from that, and maybe something to consider for next year if we're still not finding it's giving us the lockdown from students to general population that we like.
Great. So just so I'm clear in terms of our direction to the superintendent, we're really asking for a couple of things in the revision. One is the start of school for students before Labor Day, with workshops spread out, looking at the presidential primary, which is variable because we don't know when that will be set and for what date it will be set in order to ensure New Hampshire's first in the nation status. And then additionally, if in fact one might be held on town meeting day in April. Are there any other sets of direction that the board wishes to give the superintendent in examining next year's calendar? Vice Chair Barnes.
I think in prior years we've also vetted some very specific holidays that were we were given feedback on. Of course, one being Columbus Day. Martin Luther King Day was another. But some of the side activities that get into things like SATs and all that we've discussed in prior years, soccer, huge soccer weekend and Columbus Day, that I don't think we want to consider those as flexible dates for planning days.
I would agree. And additionally, some of the folks who wrote letters asked why we weren't observing President's Day, and I think it makes sense to just explain why that day and not Martin Luther King Day. Someone, I think, asked the question, are you valuing one more than the other? And that's not, in fact, the case. The reason that we're not observing President's Day is we currently and have historically had a vacation in February that falls in the following week. And so the idea of observing a holiday and taking a 4-day week only to then have a week off as the calendar has been set doesn't make sense, where Martin Luther King Day falls in January, and it's easier to actually, no, Martin Luther King Day, yeah, falls in January. I have to check myself. And so it just makes sense to break up the calendar a little bit there. Yes, Ms. Guglielmi.
So I wasn't on the school board last year, as you know, when you went through this process. But if I remember correctly, Columbus Day was a day that the board took feedback from parents, and there was a lot of feedback on, there was a predominant theme in the feedback that was received and that's why that was added back in this year. Is that correct?
To be observed, yes.
Yeah.
Feedback from parents was that for a lot of the students that they participate in weekend sports tournaments, either locally or traveling, soccer being a big one, and that a lot of the championship games are held on Mondays with the expectation that all of the schools, districts, or the kids participating have that day off, and it puts parents in something of a quandary, and so that's why that was put back.
And then the other thing I just wanted to say, I'm really grateful for the feedback, and it's great to see the trend increasing. I love getting parent feedback. I'd like to get feedback on a variety of other issues as well, but in maybe a way that's a little more automated as the feedback continues to increase. But you know, I think it's if we continue to ask the feedback around this particular subject, I would expect those numbers to continue to increase as the expectation is there that we'll ask for it. So I would also encourage us to continue to ask for the feedback next year as well.
I agree. Vice Chair Barnes.
And yeah, back to that. Honestly, I know you're talking about directives for the superintendent with our last pass of comments. So, number 3 on this was: do we as a board feel that a survey makes more sense via, say, a Survey Monkey, so we can get more targeted responses, asking very specific questions? And I think we're there. I mean, we've gotten some very anecdotal and varied, but it doesn't give us pointed ideas. And it also doesn't give us the audience, the breadth of audience that we're looking for. As far as, if they have a Survey Monkey, we can go through and ask very specific questions. Some, regarding the calendar, some regarding some other feedback areas. If there's more commentary that they want to provide, they can always, at any point throughout the year, email the board, and we can always address that. And the other thing, blizzard bags, it's something I would like to, I think we keep hearing it, we would love to see what it would take, and that's another Survey Monkey question to me. Would you commit to blizzard bags knowing that 80% of the district would be required? Before we ask the district to do anything, are parents on board knowing that they may be working from home during those blizzard days or having to go to work with their child in daycare, be committing to getting the work done via an online blizzard bag or literally a bag if it's a smaller grade? They don't have a lot of computer access. That we need 80% or it's a failure, because it's all or nothing. It's less than 80%, it doesn't count, which means that if your kid did and another kid didn't, there's some social considerations that we have to make in the classroom, because those kids will know who did their blizzard bag and who didn't, because they talk. So honestly, that's something we have to consider as a board seriously. But as a parent, they would need to commit that they're serious about wanting to partake in this blizzard bag. And if we don't get 80% commitment from parents, I'd say 90% commitment from parents, because that 10% is your best, that delta, I say, is the best intended parents that can't get it done for one reason or another, work, whatever, no fault of their own sometimes. But I think we need to ask. We're not asking maybe the pointed questions. I'll give us the pointed answers that we can manipulate the data using the tools that come with an online application. So I think we're there. And next year I would like to see that differential happen. And as I said, I think there's a ton of things that we can survey our district's parents on, so that they feel that they are invested in this process and get the representation they're looking for from us, the board. So that's just my 2 cents, but obviously the fine points will be for 2016 at this point.
Mr. Snyder.
So yeah, so I look at this in 2 ways. One, what do we need to do for next year? Because obviously there's some pressure points in next year's calendar, and I think the other members have hit on them. I think that it's probably not appropriate to look at and debate the holidays, the things like Columbus Day and Martin Luther King Day and things like that, but rather look at the workshop schedule to see if we can move a couple of days early to start earlier. I think that Shannon hit it right on the election days, in particular the primary election in January or February or whenever it may end up. So I think parents will have to end up being potentially a little flexible when that day is going to be for the workshop, knowing that likely we'll have to use the high school for that. But also, we have used workshop day for the April election before as well. So, I mean, it's not unprecedented for us to do that. I know that losing the August Academy is You know, there's a detriment there, there's a downside to that, but I think that given the input we've got from parents, you know, and the way the summer is sort of shaping because the calendar is, it's unfortunate this year, but we have to react, and I think it's the right thing to do to react. But fundamentally speaking, you know, we've talked about the calendar in different ways for the last 3 years. This is the third year on the board. I know that when I first came on the board, one of the questions I asked was, why don't we look at teachable hours? And I quickly found out when you start peeling the onion layers back, it's not a simple thing. I know that there's a lot of parents say, can we add 20 minutes a day? It should be pretty easy to do. Well, when you start doing that, then you start to have to calculate things in a way that you normally don't calculate. And different schools do things differently. Like an elementary school is much easier to structure a day and count as teachable hours versus a high school or even middle school, because they have study halls and lunch breaks at random times and things like that. So it's complex. And if you go to I think the webpage that Amherst put together was great, because it started off by saying, after 3 years of investigation, you don't go into this lightly and just decide to do it. Historically speaking, and having my wife who works at one of these districts, the ice storm of a few years ago is what caused most of these districts to start looking at teachable hours. And if you notice, they're all just west of us. So you look at Amherst, Wilton, Lineborough, other districts that are out there, because they lost all of December of whatever that year was. I can't remember the exact year, but the month in December was lost because of the ice storm. So they had no choice but to switch to teachable hours, and they saw some benefits to them. So one of the requests I make to this board is based on this input and what we've seen with this winter and things, is that I'd like that before we get into the calendar creation and before we get into the contract negotiation, that we as a board look seriously at something sort of, you know, what do we do for the calendar? Do teachable hours make sense? What's involved? What impacts does it have potentially to the MTA contract that we'd have to look at? What impact does it have to the state, where we have to count hours, and you know, and how do we accommodate those? What does it mean to build in snow days? I mean, I know that you can build in snow days. You can choose not to build in snow days, depending on the way you, as a district, implement them. So I think that I'd like to see us as a board, as a new business. Normally I do this on a new business, but I'm going to do it now because we're talking about it. Take an action that well before either of those two events next year, that the board seriously look at the calendar, look at other districts, maybe invite some of the districts that do this to see what it is. And maybe in Merrimack we decide it's not the right thing, but at least we got to look at it. And maybe that's when we use SurveyMonkey or whatever to get specific input back on some of the what-if questions that we've got. I think that would be very helpful. So,
You've stimulated conversation. Board Member Guglielmi.
No, I agree with that. I think it's something you go into and we get prepared on it. I mean, you have things, people have lives that they plan out too. Their piano lessons, you got parents waiting because they have 20 minutes to get their kid from, you know, one thing to whatever their after school activity may be. So, you know, those are all factors to be considered.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I felt like I had one more thing to say, but it's escaped me.
If it comes back to you, let me know. Vice Chair Barnes.
And to that end, Andy, I think the one thing that we have to talk about is the fact that the MTA is going to come to the negotiating table around October. So they will be a huge factor into how we can actually play this out.
Yep.
So the surveying, the investigation, and the research, I think, is going to have to happen not necessarily this time next year, but first thing next year, first thing next academic year.
that, or even potentially at the end of the summer we start to talk through some of this piece.
Absolutely.
So we're well underway and can know what questions to ask and all that stuff.
Agreed.
Wonderful. Ms. Guglielmi.
I remembered what I wanted to say. It had to do with, so this year, just to make sure that I understand, we had, was it 4 or 5 snow days?
So at this point, we have canceled school 4 days due to snow. We've had 5 delayed starts, but that doesn't impact the end of the calendar. And the superintendent will talk about on item number 8,
Okay.
the status of the current calendar and
Right.
where we stand. But to this point, it's been 4.
So if we were on the teachable hours, we'd have, let's say this year, for example, we would have these 4 days, the hours in the 4 days to consider, as well as the delayed opening. So it'd be like an extra day to make up
Right.
over
Those-
time, right?
If it was 5 2-hour delays, right, we would have lost 10 additional hours there, where we didn't lose that when counting
So
by
that kind of
days.
becomes a freebie when you're under the day schedule, the way it worked out this year.
Not necessarily. The ways,
Okay.
I
That's
mean,
what I'm trying to understand.
The
So-
funny part is that, and again, having a spouse that works in a district that's done it multiple ways, when you calculate out a school year based on teachable hours, you can choose to build days in if you want to, or you can choose to roll the dice. And I've seen districts do both ways. You know, you shrink the year in, but if you have a snow day, you add the hours at the end, and then you end up adding days at the end, just like superintendent's doing here. Or you can choose to build them in if you want to, which means in a year you get no snow days, you actually end up teaching more hours than the minimum or the amount that you need, which I think is like 990 or whatever the number works out to be. So depending on how the calendar is crafted, they might be a freebie, they might not. So I think that's part of the thing we have to look at. So yeah, no, absolutely.
Thanks. Any other comments? There was a lot of good discussion there. I want to share a few thoughts and affirm a number of things that were said. First and foremost, I also want to thank the 80 families who took the time to look at the calendar and write us back. Clearly, it informs our perspective, even year over year, right? We could have said, well, we got responses last year and people were happy starting after Labor Day. We're doing that again. Of course they'll be happy starting after Labor Day. And as we find out, that's not the case. And I wholeheartedly agree that moving to a more systematic way of gathering specific feedback would be helpful, because it was rather clear in reading the responses to the calendar, and the fault lies on us alone, that not enough of the constraints and working assumptions that went into building the proposed calendar were understood, such that the feedback in many cases was there wasn't much we could do with it. In other words, take out Veterans Day. Okay, well, can't. Thank you. But so in a more automated system, we should be able to more clearly lay out, here are the constraints, what do you think of A, B, C, and ask those questions. And as Vice Chair Barnes said, still leave enough room for comment in other areas. I agree with planning ahead and knowing what things might look like, and I think that we can take that as an action moving forward. I want to say something else, though, about blizzard bags that wasn't mentioned on top of the 80% compliance. And I think it's a fundamental issue. We're having a discussion right now about instructional hours and instructional days. And blizzard bags is essentially worksheets that kids complete at home. It's not instruction. And I think if we want to be serious about the instruction that we're giving to students, simply giving them another day's worth of homework is not the way that I personally think we should be going as a district. With 4 days, right, we're talking about 4 days of homework that they're not actually sitting with a teacher, hearing what the teacher has to say, getting coached, working through problems. They're just sitting at home with a worksheet. And so the research that I've done on it is that it's not something, at least at this point, that I'm supportive of. I'm happy to ask the questions, but I would just share at this point, besides the administrative challenges of tracking the 80% compliance in order to get the day and parents' willingness to do that, I think it's more fundamental. Are we giving instruction, or are we simply giving busy work to the students? But we can ask the question. Vice Chair Barnes.
And to that point, I will counter with you to say what's going to happen the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 22nd of June this year for quality instructional content. Because I think you get to a point in June, especially when the room gets hot, that basically you're checked out. So the question is, do we keep them engaged somehow on those blizzard days, or do we basically, slow roast them at the end of June, because I don't know, after the second week of June, I find that these kids are pretty much fried, literally fried. So I'm not sure it's the most robust instruction the third week in June.
Mr. Schneider.
I just thought of something, BYOAC to those days, but I wouldn't go there for that. I think this is where restructuring the year to potentially shrinking removes that issue from it, because it doesn't put us so deep into it if we're able to do that. I tend to agree that it's a hit or miss with the blizzard bags. I think it helps in cases where you get a lot of snow days. It maybe helps you make up one or two, but I think as a general rule, it's difficult to do. So, but it'd be interesting to see what the feedback is.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think the perception is the time of year, not necessarily the room temperature. Those rooms in late August, early September are just as hot as they are in mid to late June. So it's just a matter of whether you see the light at the end of the tunnel for summer vacation or not. So I think we have, if there's nothing further, I think the superintendent has something to say.
I do. I want to do a clarifier. So if you look at your yellow calendar, which is looking at next year, just for planning purposes, it would be our intent, where we can't start any earlier than August 31st. Let's say that is when we began, and that there would be a couple of teacher workshop days, and then the first day of school might be September 2nd. It would be my intention to have school then on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Would that be as you see it? Because there was a time when we actually started up and then took Friday off for a long Labor Day weekend. I would prefer to just go straight ahead. Once we start, just keep going. So I just wanted to see how you were feeling before we go into planning.
I'll say that would be my preference, to see it that way. I see Ms. Gualiumi shaking her head. Mr. Schneider? You
Well,
have
my
something
only
to say?
question would be, I would tend to agree, but is that what the other districts in general are doing? You said they start anywhere from the 26th to the 2nd, depending on the districts. Is that typically?
I'll go back and look. I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest with you, I spent more time looking to find out what they were doing
No, I
for
understand.
February and April vacation, and to a calendar. All 15 are the same. They all take February and April vacation.
Right,
So
but it would just be good to know.
that's what I focused on.
No, I
Yeah,
just don't remember them all. And
yeah, but I'll go back and
yeah,
look.
just to double check to see what the
Yep.
general trend is. But thanks.
Wonderful. And so we will receive at our next meeting a revised calendar on which the board will act to either modify and approve, potentially modify. And I hope that we answered all of the questions that were raised earlier. Wonderful. So that takes us now to item number 7, scheduling of the 2015 graduation date. Superintendent Chaffrey.
Thank you. So as you saw in your packet the letter from Principal Johnson. He and I have conferred and have set the graduation date for the class of 2015 on Saturday, June 13th at 10 a.m. So I hope you would have that date put in your calendar.
I think we look forward to seeing Ms. Crowley cross the stage. Have you live tweeted it yet? Wonderful. Hit send, will you? I don't do Twitter. Is it send on Twitter? Yeah? Doesn't say tweet? I don't know.
Should there be a sound effect coming up or something?
All right, and that now takes us to item number 8 on tonight's agenda. Review the status of the 2014-2015 school calendar, the year that we're in. Superintendent Chaffrey.
Thank you. So you have the current calendar in front of you, and you can see that we have taken 4 snow days, 2 in January, 2 in February. And you will also see that when I submitted the calendar, I'm obligated to put a series of makeup days. Those days were listed. There were 6 of them, and they went from June 17th to June 24th. As of today, March 16th, the last day of school is Monday, June 22nd. What I would propose to you tonight is that I would eventually request a waiver from the commissioner for specifically January 27th, which was the day of the blizzard, when the governor requested that all vehicles be off the highway. The governor never closed schools. That was a local decision. But that is the one that I would request. And I wouldn't make the request until April because, as you know, we can have inclement weather for the remainder of March or even the beginning of April. There are actually 29 school days between tomorrow and April vacation. And so, as I said, I would prefer waiting until April to see what transpires before I make the request. She could easily look at the calendar and say, but you put those makeup days in place for a reason. That is, if there was inclement weather, you would use one of those to make it up. And that is a true statement, but I still would go forward and make that request, which would then make the last day of school as we stand Friday, June 19th. And I definitely would need school board approval to do that, and when I submit the letter, I submit the minutes that go with it to show that the board took action. I would say, in speaking with my colleagues, we're all over the map because some districts began school in August. It's funny, Merrimack reversed itself. We used to begin in August. Other districts began after Labor Day, and then we swapped positions. And also, there are some who did not front end their teacher workshop days all up front like we have, but put them throughout the year. Therefore, you can take a teacher workshop day that's throughout the year and turn it into a school day, you see. So that gives you just a bit more flexibility. So for me, I have to go for a waiver. That's the only alternative I really have. But I pose that to you. If that's something you think is meritorious, I would plan on doing it, making the formal request in April.
Thank you. So I'll make a motion that the board authorize the superintendent to request a waiver from the commissioner at the date of the superintendent's choosing for the January 27th, 2014 snow day that we took, which was a declared state of emergency. Seconded by Ms. Guagliumi. I don't think I need to say anything beyond what the superintendent said. I think the motion speaks for itself. Is there any discussion? All right. Seeing none, we'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. Thank you, Superintendent. And good luck. That takes us to item number 9, other correspondence. The only correspondence I have to report was the correspondence I received on behalf of the board related to the calendar, the 80 families who sent us feedback. Is there any other correspondence to come before the board? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to comments. Any comments from the board? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 10, new business. Is there any new business to come before the board? We're flying. Item number 11, committee reports. Ms. Crowley.
I only have one. The dodgeball tournament hosted by the National Honor Society will be held tomorrow at 6 at the high school in the gymnasium, and admission is $3.
Wonderful. What time again?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Wonderful. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. Committee reports. Any others? Mr. Schneider.
Thanks. On Thursday, March 5th, there was the Merrimack Safeguard meeting. I left the agenda back in a different notebook, but what I can remember, there were 2 significant items that we discussed, one of which is the, in previous meetings, the previous meeting which I missed, they discussed having different focus groups be interviewed to bring in different focal areas within Merrimack Safeguard, such as educators, such as law enforcement, other ones, to bring in and talk about topics. Some of those are going to occur over the next month. I'm part of the business segment. There's going to be a business subsection we're going to do. So the Merrimack Safeguard, in response to the grant that they received, are moving forward with some subgroups to talk about different areas. So that's moving forward. Another thing that's interesting is the Merrimack Safeguard website disappeared. The hosting source disappeared one day, and all the content went along with it. So Betsy, who took it upon herself with support from some of the members to basically recreate a new Merrimack Safeguard. The URL is the same. It's merrimacksafeguard.org. But there's new content. It's being now structured to provide a lot of online information about the board, but also where to get more data and things like that. So if folks could go to www.merrimacksafeguard.org and look, you can see the latest one and provide input back to Safeguard. But those are the two major things that I recall from the meeting.
Great. Thank you. Vice Chair Barnes.
First, I'll give you an update on Parks and Rec, which is meeting this Wednesday. But the Easter egg hunt had to be moved to April 16th of this year. It'll be 10 a.m. at Wasserman Park because it'd be not a very hard thing to find an Easter egg in a snowbank. So they will be going with better weather.
White.
No, exactly. Or yellow if it's a dog park area. So, but that being said, mark your calendars for April 16th after Easter for the Easter egg hunt. And then on the 11th, the Board of Directors of the New Hampshire School Board Association met. And as a board member, I had the opportunity to meet with members from Senator Jean Shaheen's office, Senator Kelly Ayotte's office, Congresswoman Annie Custer's office, and Congressman Frank Ginta's office, who all came to us. They have basically staff that specializes in different areas. They sent their specialists in education to meet with the New Hampshire School Boards Association to talk about the association's goals, the association's platform, what the federal government's, I guess, their legislation does to impact our platform, pro and con. And then it opened up to the floor. And from that point, it was all about, as member districts, member board members, how our district is impacted on the front lines in public education with federal guidelines, funding, etc. I had the opportunity to meet with the superintendent and assistant superintendent of curriculum the day before that meeting to go over what a typical day in a year in the life of a public school district has been impacted by our federal government. So the areas that I brought forward at that board meeting, I put in a packet for you all to go over. But first was kind of not only what you're asking for, but when you're asking for it and why you're using it. The civil rights data collection was a big area. We're asked by the federal government to collect very specific data in a very specific format. It's not a query or like a quick data pull. It's a very manual process because it has to follow the federal template, not our templates, which is very labor intensive. And of course, they're asking for it. At the same time, we're trying to institute a smarter, balanced platform for standardized testing. So our resources aren't being used for education. They're being used for political data collection, for which we don't even know what it's being used for. So not only do we question why we're doing it, but we question why we're doing it when we're doing it. So summers are a time where we don't have as many students engaged, and maybe that's a time that would be more appropriate for our government to ask of our resources. We talked about funding and the stability of federal funding mechanisms and the risks that brings to our district. An example was Title II funding, which is used for the development of curriculum and professional development of employees. If that funding goes away, we still need to develop curriculum and develop our staff to be able to deliver that curriculum in a high-quality way. Without the funding being stable, it's difficult for us. We'd have to, of course, it goes straight back to the taxpayer. We have to make sure we do what we have to do to deliver an education. Title I funding was another area where we talked about how structured and how limiting it was to the way that we get federal funds. Title I funding deals with instruction, but it's also not only instructors, but resources, so things like equipment. So when we have a Title I tutor, if they have small pockets of time in their day, we can't use them for anything but Title I function, which means that we have someone who has pockets in their day that they are inefficient to the district because the student's doing what they can do on their own. They don't need that Title I person for it, but we don't get to utilize them for anything else. That being said, we have the same thing with equipment. If the example given was if we have a rack of computers and they're Title I funded computers, they can be used for nothing else but Title I students for Title I content. So for schools, it creates a two-pronged difficulty. Find a school with an abundance of space, especially when you're talking about cities, my goodness. You know, we have some space, but we don't have nearly the space to house two sets of equipment for all students, for Title I purposes and for non-Title I purposes. So, you know, those kind of things, it's just the stringent structuring of it doesn't make for what I would call a true partnership to further education. Let's see. And then the other area which got a lot of discussion was nutrition programs. You know, while the intentions of the federal regulations are honorable, the regulatory structure of it makes it very difficult for us to deliver what we're looking to accomplish. Things like our location. Obviously, we're in the Northeast. You're not getting fresh fruit off the tree right now, if you haven't noticed. But that means that we're having to either, we're going to have to pay a premium for that same, you know, standardized foods. And it's just not working out. So there was a lot of time spent on that. And of course, you know, is it being eaten? Is it being thrown out? You know, are the portions not meeting the demand of a larger student? Because fruit has a lot of sugar, so therefore you can't give a lot of fruit, which means they're not getting a lot of food. So those kind of things. But they didn't come out with the real picture, but it's so stringent that we don't have flexibility. And because of the way school lunches are funded, it's a self-funding mechanism. So for those that have free and reduced lunch, of course, we get funding from the federal government. Well, the difference comes from those students buying lunches. So the rate that a student has to pay for lunches, and this was, you know, I got nodding heads throughout the table. It's impacted by the district's, you know, what they have to do to comply. So why do the rates go up on school lunches? Because of federal compliance and making sure that we can deliver what we can deliver, what we have to deliver. So obviously some flexibility is being requested. Another demand for information, we gave a great example to them, which was we were asked for information that wasn't even about our district, and it was required by the federal government. And it's the example I gave to our representation, you know, their representatives, was that we really, you know, when we hire a superintendent, we hire her to deliver an education to students, not be an expert on federal red tape. The good news is, after we gave all that great documentation, because it gave supporting evidence of the issue that we have, we were being demanded information that didn't apply to us. But if we didn't comply, we were in non-compliance. So we ended up getting a call from the Department of Education the next day, and with an apology and a waiver. So it obviously was a very productive meeting for us. But that's, you know, it went over. It was, you know, almost a 2-hour meeting, but the majority of it was spent doing, you know, speaking with them.
Great. Mr. Chevino?
If you just give me 2 minutes to make a comment. From my viewpoint, you have to understand the weight that civil rights data collection report puts upon my office, both current year and years to follow. It is a breakdown of specific information in categories that do not exist, that will manually have to be extracted from the system, and will literally put me out of commission for probably a good 2 to 3 weeks to get this accomplished. And our computer systems manager, Luda Balanovich, who is very, very good at her job, and she is very concerned about this, and so am I, because it is absolutely just a massive undertaking of data collection.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Vice Chair Barnes, for representing us at that meeting. Hopefully the feedback is heard, internalized, and acted upon. Are there any other committee reports or comments? Mr. Schneider.
Yeah, I apologize. I neglected. I had received some correspondence from a resident about assessments and other local districts, some questions there, so I forgot to mention that. Thanks.
Thank you. No worries. So if there are no more committee reports or any other prior agenda items, we'll move now to item number 12, which is public comments on agenda items. Opportunity for the public to address us on anything we've spoken about this evening. simply ask you come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Hillary May, and I live at 60 Middlesex in Merrimack. And I have a second grader at Reeds Ferry. So I just wanted to thank you because I think, I just didn't understand how the calendar is put together. And I think if I didn't come to this meeting, I still, because I gave feedback, but we don't get anything back. So we just, thank you for your information, for giving feedback. So this is very enlightening to know because I think, I never thought like, oh, it's so easy, why don't you just do this? Other districts do it. But I think we just want to know, how do other districts do it? Or what goes into the process? And I think this was very informative. I'm very surprised that 80 families out of 1,500 did not respond on the calendar looking at when Labor Day was this year. And I can guarantee that a lot of people didn't even look at it because last year, we were given the proposed calendar back. It came in the kids' folder. This year, we got like a blue slip that says, it's been updated, go onto the website, click on here, and you can see the proposed calendar. Don't you? So I think in future, maybe they should send out the proposed calendar so parents can just like do a quick look and look at it because I really think that if nothing changes, people are going to be like, for next year, going, oh my God, school's not starting until, they're just not going to, it's just not there. That's not on their, it's next year. I think it's hard for them to just take the time, especially both parents at work. I'm stay home, so, I have that luxury and it's, but I think for a lot of people who both parents are working, they get that piece of paper and then they go, oh, I got to go online and look at it. And it's kind of hard to see. It's just, I don't know. I'm a paper person. It was nice to have the calendar actually come home with the kids that last year and actually be able to really look at it. So, but I just wanted to thank you because it was very enlightening to see how, other districts do it. And about the snow or the ice storm that was in, I think, December of 2008. And that makes sense why those who lost power for months, some of them are out, why they might have gone that way. So, yeah, so it's, it was just very informative. So thank you.
Thank you. Very good feedback. And I learned a long time ago that stay-at-home moms work very hard in the home. So both parents are working there as well, right?
So Natasha Bayramova, 26 Crossroads Path. I also want to thank you very much for this meeting, and it was also very informative for me. I suspected when I started that it's definitely not as easy as it seemed, and it was proven that it's not. But I just want to comment on a couple of things. When I was saying, could we try something different, and what Mr. Schneider said, if we could look into, it's obviously a longer term, not for next year, but, look at other districts and see how they do it, and you guys look at it really specifically and see if Merrimack can do it, or again, try it maybe, but at least do all that legwork before. I definitely support that. That's a great idea. Also, as Hillary, I was very surprised that out of 1,500, it was only 80 people. Very astounding. So what Mrs. Barnes said, that definitely I think SurveyMonkey, even I'm still surprised with the whole social media and everything, and I tried to spread the word. I put on Facebook, and I work at the library. I tried to, but still, 80 people, that's crazy. So I think maybe the SurveyMonkey, maybe when you do give people specific little things and, and you don't put, like you were saying, you cannot even do anything about Veterans Day, so it's not there, but the things that you could actually do, and that's a specific yes or no, and if they have more feedback, they can put it in the comment section. So I think that's a great idea. Oh, I think I'm forgetting something. But anyway, thank you. I'll email you now. Thank you very much again for your time and for you answered all the questions and definitely enlightened me as well as Hillary. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for coming and participating. We'll close public comments. We'll take a moment to sign the manifest, and I will entertain a motion to enter non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, A, B, and C, made by Vice Chair Barnes, seconded by Mr. Schneider. Roll call vote. Ms. Gualiumi, how do you vote?
In favor.
Mr. Schneider?
In favor?
Vice Chair Barnes?
In favor.
And the chair votes in favor. So that motion passes 4-0-0. Thank you, everyone. Good night.